In earlier sessions, we've talked about monopolies and the problems that they can create. Now I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we try to regulate a monopoly. As a refresher, let's first talk about the problem with monopoly, and from an economist perspective, the problem with monopoly is really the deadweight loss. In this diagram, the deadweight loss is this region pointed to here. It's above marginal cost and below demand. Remember that a monopolist keeps output low, Q star, relative to the output that would occur, say, at the intersection of marginal cost and demand, would have been out here, and the price is high relative to what that price would be, and it all gives rise to some deadweight loss. And so a question we can ask is, what would we like, or what would a regulator like the monopolist to do? Now let's suppose that what the regulator likes is efficiency. Well, then in that case, what the regulator wants is for the firm to be induced to charge a price equal to marginal cost and to produce where MC crosses demand, which again is here, and that would give rise to this quantity and this price. That's our dream world. The question is, how could a regulator bring about this efficient solution? Well, let's think about what a firm does. The firm that's profit maximizing is going to choose output where MR equals MC. So suppose we could somehow change marginal revenue so that the firm doing what firms do would do the efficient thing. That's the strategy here. And so our tool for changing the marginal revenue is going to be a price ceiling. And what that is a maximum price that the firm is allowed to charge. What I want to think about here is what this does to marginal revenue. So let's take a specific example, P equals 10 minus Q, but let's say the price ceiling is that the price must be less than or equal to 7. It cannot be higher than 7. So we can do an exercise, kind of like an exercise we've done before, where we have quantity and price that are along the demand curve, and then we can calculate the revenue. But we have to keep in mind that this constraint is binding. So let's start with a quantity of 1. Now if there were no constraint, then because P equals 10 minus Q, the quantity of 1, this would equal this would equal 9. But remember, 9 is bigger than 7, so 9's not allowed. Instead, we'd like to charge 9, but we charge 7. So selling a quantity of 1, we have a price of 7 and a revenue of 7 because 1 times 7 is 7. How about a quantity of 2? Well, the quantity of 2 on the demand curve, if there were no constraint or no price ceiling, we'd have a price of 8. But 8's bigger than 7. 7's the max we're allowed to charge, so we'd have to charge 7 when selling 2, and we'd generate 14 in revenue. Now, we can already begin to see some marginal revenue as we go from Q equals 1 to Q equals 2. Revenue goes from 7 to 14, and so marginal revenue is 7. How about as we go up to a Q of 3? Well, at a Q of 3, the price on the demand curve is actually, the price on the demand curve is 7. And now, actually, the constraint, we're right on the demand curve. We're at the max price we could charge, and 3 times 7 is 21. Marginal revenue is again 7. This is going to change as we go to a quantity of 4, so let's just do one more. Get to a quantity of 4, and now we're following the demand curve down. The price that clears the market with a quantity of 4 is 6. That's below the price ceiling, so nothing prevents us from going to 6. Now revenue is 4 times 6, or 24, and now the marginal revenue of going from the third to the fourth unit is 24 minus 21, or 3. What's going on here? Well, when 7 is the max price we can charge, and when the price on the demand curve is 7 or above, we're stuck with a marginal revenue just of the ceiling, 7. As soon as the ceiling no longer binds, we're back on the usual marginal revenue curve. Let's look at this in a picture. So here we have price and quantity as usual. We've got a demand curve out here. We've got the blue marginal revenue curve that starts at the same intercept as demand. It comes down to here, associated with the unregulated demand. But suppose then we add in a price ceiling. Here's the price ceiling. Well, if this is the price ceiling, then what happens is marginal revenue just follows along the ceiling until we hit the demand curve, and then it jumps down to the traditional marginal revenue curve. And so overall, the marginal revenue curve is this red squiggly thing that goes like this, jumps down to this, and continues like that. What we've in effect done, by imposing a ceiling, we've changed MR from just a line that bisects demand over to, well, a ceiling jumping down and then a continuation of the old MR. All right, now that we have the new MR that arises from having the price ceiling, let's check this out. So here we have a situation. We have a demand curve, starts up here, goes down to here. We have a marginal cost curve that intersects demand right here. And so what we'd like to have happen, as we mentioned a few slides ago, is for the firm to produce a quantity where MC crosses demand. So how about we impose a ceiling of PR? That means that the marginal revenue is horizontal here until we hit demand, and jumps down and continues. But now ask the question, where's the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost? And sure enough, it's right here. Therefore, the firm chooses this quantity of output, and its best price is PR. So we've accomplished our goal. By imposing a regulation, we can induce the firm to make an efficient choice. Now, this is kind of new for us. And in particular, what's novel for us right here is that we have a regulation that, at least in principle, actually improves efficiency. I mean, think back to the perfectly competitive model. Whenever we put in a regulation or a tax or some kind of interference in the market, we created deadweight loss. Here, by contrast, by putting in a regulation, we actually eliminate a deadweight loss. So this is new. This is different. Now, before we get too carried away with optimism about regulating inefficiency away, we have to realize that it is challenging in practice to know the right price. You know, here we assumed we knew the price. We knew the price that arose from the intersection of marginal cost and demand. And so given that, we knew how to regulate. You know, in practice, knowing what the right price is and knowing, requires knowing a lot about marginal cost, which in turn requires us to rely on the firm we're trying to regulate. You know, ask them, well, what is your marginal cost? And if they're a little strategic, they'll say, well, it's pretty high. And if we believe them, we'll regulate a price that's too high. So there is this challenge associated with getting that information. And as cynical as it sounds, it's probably true that firms have an incentive to distort this sort of information. So, I'd like to walk away from these slides with the thought that, well, number one, it is in principle possible to improve efficiency with regulation in a context like this, but we shouldn't think that it's easy. There are some challenges in implementing things like that. All right. What are our takeaways from this short module on regulating a monopoly? Well, what we've shown is how to eliminate the deadweight loss associated with single price monopoly with regulation. And what you do is you change the firm's marginal revenue so that when they find the intersection of MR and MC, it's actually the efficient solution. And how do we do that literally? Well, it's a price ceiling at the correct price. And what's novel and worth emphasis here again is that here a regulation actually improves efficiency rather than creating deadweight loss. But in practice, it is hard to get the relevant information, so this can be a hard thing to do in practice.